Okay, so get this. Right from where you're sitting, we're climbing Mount Everest today.
Oh,
Well, not literally, but
right.
close enough. We're going on a deep dive into Mount Everest.
The highest point on Earth, a place that has captivated explorers and adventurers, for well over a century.
And we're interested in more than just the climb, right?
Mm.
We want to understand the stories this mountain could tell about culture, geography, and the limits of human endurance.
Absolutely.
So we're diving deep into some source material, excerpts from Mount Everest Wikipedia page,
Yeah.
to uncover the fascinating details that make Everest so much more than just the tallest peak in the world. And one of the most interesting details I think that we found is the story behind the name Everest itself. It's a name that's relatively recent, and actually, it sparked quite a bit of controversy.
It did, even back then.
Really? I mean, it's such an iconic name now. What's the story there?
Well, so the mountain was actually named after Sir George Everest,
Right.
a British surveyor.
Okay.
But, and here's the ironic part, he actually opposed the idea.
What, you're kidding?
He believed strongly in preserving local names for landmarks.
So the guy who got the mountain named after him didn't even want it.
Exactly.
Wow. So what were the local names that they were using?
There are a couple that were prominent. In Tibetan, it's known as Chomolungma,
Okay.
which translates to Holy Mother, which speaks volumes about the spiritual significance the mountain holds in Tibetan culture.
That's beautiful. And what about the Nepali name?
Sagarmatha, in Nepali, meaning forehead of the sky.
Wow.
I know, it's such a vivid image, right? It really sort of instantly conveys that awe-inspiring scale of this mountain.
It really does.
Yeah.
And you know what? It makes you realize that long before any Western explorer even set foot on its slopes, that Everest already held deep meaning for the people who lived, in its shadow. It's almost like the name Everest was just kind of layered on top of an already rich history and cultural identity.
Yeah, absolutely. And that cultural significance, it isn't limited to just names, right?
Yeah.
The surrounding ecosystem is also incredibly unique, and it plays this vital role in the lives of the people who, call this region home.
You often hear about the dangers of climbing Everest.
Sure.
But I'd be lying if I said I hadn't pictured it as this completely barren, icy wasteland.
Yeah. Right. It's a common misconception. While it is true that the extreme altitude makes for a very harsh environment, Everest is surprisingly teeming with life.
Really?
Oh, yeah. There was actually an expedition. They discovered 10
Wow.
new ant species on Everest.
Ants living at that altitude. That's wild. What else is up there?
Well, I mean, it's not just insects. We're talking Himalayan black bears found as high as 14,300 meters.
Wow.
And get this, bar-headed geese migrate over the Himalayas, including Everest, every year.
Now, that's a commute I would not envy.
I know, right?
Imagine looking up and seeing a flock of geese just casually flying over Everest, while you're struggling to catch your breath, just thinking about it. It really puts into perspective just how extreme of an environment we're talking about.
It certainly does. And speaking of extreme environments, let's talk about the infamous death zone. This is where things get really interesting. The death zone. Above 8,000 meters, the air is so thin that the human body simply can't acclimatize.
No wonder they call it the death zone.
Yeah.
What happens to your body at that altitude?
Well, essentially, your body just starts shutting down. You're only getting about a third of the oxygen that you would be getting at sea level.
Wow.
This leads to all sorts of problems, fatigue, headaches, nausea, confusion, even like your decision-making abilities become impaired.
It sounds terrifying. And this was actually studied, right? Didn't they measure blood oxygen levels at the summit?
Yeah, they did. The Caldwell Extreme Everest expedition, they found that blood oxygen levels at the summit were even lower than anyone had anticipated. It helped explain why even some of the most experienced climbers can make, critical errors in judgment when they're up there. The lack of oxygen literally affects your brain function.
So it's like the mountain itself is testing you, pushing you to your absolute physical and mental limits.
Exactly. And yet, despite these dangers, Everest just continues to beckon adventurers, pushing those limits in ways that you might not expect. I mean, we've talked about the traditional climb, but Everest has also become this proving ground for extreme sports.
Okay, now you're talking about people skiing down Everest, paragliding off the summit. Those things just sound insane when you're talking about, the highest mountain on Earth.
It might sound insane, but, that's precisely what draws some people to it. Take Jean-Marc Boivin, for example. In 1988, he became the first person to paraglide off Everest. He reached a lower camp in just 12 minutes.
12 minutes.
Yeah.
It takes longer than that to drive across town sometimes. And I think that he climbed all the way to the summit, knowing that he was going to descend by literally flying off the side of the mountain.
It speaks to a different kind of courage, doesn't it? The kind that requires you to face not only the mountain's challenges, but also, like, that fear of pushing your own personal boundaries.
And it's not just paragliding. You mentioned skiing earlier. The Wikipedia page talks about Yuichiro Miura. He pioneered skiing down from the summit back in the 1970s. And get this, he summited multiple times,
Yeah.
even in his 70s and 80s.
It's a testament to the enduring allure of Everest. It's not just about the conquest, it's about the challenge, the self-discovery, the pursuit of something that pushes you beyond your perceived limitations.
And for some, that pursuit takes them to even more extreme lengths. The article even mentions base jumping off Everest.
It happened in 2013, a record-breaking base jump from the summit.
Wow.
Can you imagine the feeling of leaping from the top of the world with nothing but a wingsuit between you and the ground, thousands of feet below?
It's hard to even fathom. It makes
Yeah.
you wonder, with all the history, all the triumphs and tragedies that this mountain has witnessed, what stories could Everest tell if it could talk?
It's a humbling thought, isn't it? This immense, ancient presence that has seen it all, the best and the worst of humanity.
We often get caught up in the statistics, the records, the daring feats. But at its core, Everest reminds us that we're just visitors in this vast, powerful landscape.
Yeah. It makes you question, what is it about this mountain that draws us to it? Despite the risks, despite the challenges, what does it say about our own need to explore, to conquer, to test the limits of what's possible?
It's interesting that you bring up that question about what draws us to Everest. Because it's not just a one-way street, is it? It's not just us projecting our fascination onto the mountain. The mountain has impacted countless lives, and not just those who attempt to climb it.
That's right. And the Wikipedia page, it actually touches on the lives of the Sherpa people. They're so deeply connected to Everest, and they play such a vital role in these mountaineering expeditions.
It's their backyard, in a sense.
Exactly. Their knowledge of the mountain, their strength at such high altitudes, it's remarkable. I mean, for generations, they've guided climbers, often risking their own lives to help others achieve, their dreams of reaching the summit.
It makes you think about the different experiences and perspectives that kind of converge on Everest, you know? Each climber, each Sherpa, even each scientist who studies the mountain. They're all drawn to it for their own reasons, each one adding a thread to the tapestry of Everest's story.
It's a tapestry that continues to evolve, and it's one that I think prompts us to kind of reflect on our own place within it, because, let's be honest, our fascination with Everest isn't without its consequences.
That's true. There's the environmental impact to consider.
Right. I mean, the mountain has unfortunately become kind of a repository for discarded climbing gear and waste. And it's a sobering reminder that even as we celebrate this human spirit of adventure, we have this responsibility to minimize our impact on this fragile environment.
It's a delicate balance to strike, isn't it? On the one hand, you have this incredible drive to push boundaries, to experience something truly extraordinary. But on the other hand, you have this responsibility to protect a place that has captivated the human imagination for centuries.
And it's not just about protecting the physical landscape either, right? It's about respecting the mountain's cultural significance, ensuring that the communities who call this region home benefit from tourism in a way that's sustainable and equitable.
It's a complex issue, and there are no easy answers. But it's something that I think every visitor to Everest, whether they're a climber, a trekker, or even just, an armchair explorer like ourselves, something that we all have to grapple with.
Yeah, it all circles back to that initial question, what does Everest mean to you? And it's a question that goes beyond simple geography. It's a question that kind of speaks to our values, our responsibilities, and our place in the world.
Because ultimately, Everest is more than just a mountain, right? It's a symbol, a challenge, a mirror, reflecting our own aspirations and our own limitations.
And as we've kind of delved into its many facets today, from its, controversial naming to its surprisingly diverse ecosystem, from the death zone to the extreme athletes who push their limits on its slopes, I think one thing is clear. Everest continues to just captivate our imaginations and challenge our perspectives.
It leaves us with a sense of wonder, a thirst for exploration, and perhaps most importantly, a responsibility to approach this majestic peak with the respect and the care it deserves. Welcome back to the deep dive. You know those incredible pictures of Earth from space? Well, today we're going deeper, way deeper into the International Space Station. Got this Wikipedia article you sent, and we're going to unpack all the secrets of this orbiting marvel of engineering.
Yeah, it's easy to forget when you see those pictures, but someone built that thing. It's not just a photo op, it's a testament to how much work goes into just keeping people alive hundreds of miles above the Earth for over 2 decades.
20 years, continuously inhabited. Okay, so this article jumps right into it. 5 different space agencies run this thing, right? NASA, Roscosmos, ESA, JSA, and CSA. Talk about international cooperation.
It hasn't always been easy, though, has it? I mean, you look back at the Columbia disaster in 2003, that was a huge blow to the whole project.
Definitely. That must have been a major setback. The article really emphasizes how the Columbia disaster, really forced a complete reevaluation.
The risks involved, the safety procedures, everything was put on hold.
And it makes you appreciate even more that they were able to overcome that tragedy and eventually create something even stronger.
Right. It's remarkable. And the sheer scale of it. I mean, building anything in space is a logistical nightmare.
Oh, tell me about it. This isn't just putting together some IKEA furniture. We're talking about launching all these separate modules, each one a feat of engineering on its own.
Millions of dollars, years of planning, and then you have to assemble it all in a vacuum, hundreds of miles above Earth with parts from different countries. It boggles the mind.
It's like a giant Lego set,
Mhm.
but with life support systems and science labs.
Don't forget the cupola, that dome-shaped observation module. Can you imagine the view from up there?
Oh, must be incredible. But, it's not just the view that's different up there. The article goes into some pretty wild detail about the effects of microgravity on the human body.
Yeah, we take gravity for granted down here, don't we? Our bodies have evolved over millions of years to function within this specific gravitational field.
Right, so what happens when you take that away? What happens to a human body in space for long periods?
Well, in some ways, it's like your body goes on vacation.
Vacation, huh? Doesn't sound too bad.
Well, your muscles, for example. They don't have to work as hard in space because there's no gravity pulling you down.
Ah, so they start to relax, get a little lazy.
Exactly. And if you're not careful, that relaxation can turn into muscle atrophy pretty quickly. Same thing with your bones.
Bones. What happens to your bones?
They lose density. Without gravity to work against, your bones don't need to be as strong, so they start to weaken. It's a serious concern for astronauts on long-duration missions.
Wow, I had no idea. So it's not all fun and games floating around up there.
Definitely not. It's a completely different environment with unique challenges. And it's not just your muscles and bones either. We're talking about changes to your cardiovascular system, your immune system.
Yeah.
Even the way fluids distribute in your body gets all messed up.
It's like your whole body's saying, wait a minute, this isn't how it's supposed to be.
Something like that. And those changes, those adaptations, they come with a whole host of challenges for long-duration spaceflight, challenges that scientists are still trying to fully understand.
And it's fascinating, we think of space as this empty void, but it's actually this incredibly demanding environment.
Absolutely. It's not just the lack of gravity, but the radiation exposure, the isolation. It all takes a toll. And speaking of demanding, you mentioned the cardiovascular system. That's one of the body's most vital systems.
Right. So what happens to your heart and blood vessels when you're in space for a long time?
Well, think about it. Down here on Earth, gravity's constantly pulling blood down into our legs.
Keeps our blood pressure regulated, I'm guessing?
Exactly. But in space, without that gravitational pull, blood tends to pool in the upper body, the chest and head.
Makes sense. So what does that do to your blood pressure? Does it go up?
It can. And your heart rate can change, too. The article even mentions studies showing that the heart can actually change shape in microgravity. It doesn't have to work as hard to pump blood, so it can become more spherical.
Wow, that's wild. The heart actually changes shape. It really highlights how adaptable the human body is. But it also makes you realize how much we still don't know. Like, what are the long-term consequences of those changes?
That's what scientists are trying to figure out. And it's not just the cardiovascular system either. Remember the immune system.
Right, you mentioned it earlier. And I imagine a strong immune system is extra important when you're living in a sealed environment like the ISS.
Absolutely. You're in close quarters with the same people and recycled air. It's a breeding ground for germs. But the problem is, microgravity seems to suppress the immune system.
Suppresses it. What do you mean?
Studies have shown that white blood cell activity decreases in space. And the body's response to inflammation changes too.
So it's like your body's defenses are down when you need them the most. That's a scary thought.
It is a concern, and it's something that NASA and the other space agencies are very aware of. That's why astronauts go through rigorous health screenings and quarantine procedures before and after missions.
Right, makes sense. So, given all these physiological challenges, how do astronauts even stay healthy on these long-duration space flights?
Well, exercise is absolutely crucial. Remember those 2 hours a day I mentioned earlier?
2 hours. Okay, you said it before, but seriously, 2 hours a day, that's more exercise than I get in a week.
And that's the minimum. It's not about staying in shape for a beach vacation. It's about counteracting the negative effects of microgravity on their muscles and bones.
Right, use it or lose it. But what kind of exercise can they even do in space?
Well, I have special treadmills with harnesses that simulate gravity's pull, and they do a lot of resistance training, lifting weights, and using resistance bands. It's a full-time job staying healthy up there.
I can imagine. So, we've talked about the physical challenges of living in space, but the article also went into detail about the psychological toll it takes. Being confined to that small space with the same people for months on end, it's got to mess with your head.
Oh, definitely. And it's not just the confinement, it's the isolation, the lack of privacy, the constant noise.
The noise, I was just getting to that. The article mentioned something about noise levels being a much bigger deal than you might think.
Yeah, acoustic fatigue, they call it.
Acoustic fatigue. Sounds intense.
It can be. Imagine that constant hum of machinery, the ventilation fans, the beeping of instruments.
Right. And it's not like you can just step outside for a little peace and quiet.
Exactly. It's relentless. And that kind of sensory overload can lead to sleep disturbances, difficulty concentrating, irritability, even mood swings.
Wow. So it's not just about being annoyed by the noise, it's about maintaining mental health.
Exactly. And it's not just the noise either. Think about the social dynamics of living in close quarters with the same small group of people for months at a time. People from different cultures, speaking different languages, with very little privacy.
Yeah, that sounds like a recipe for interpersonal conflict if you're not careful.
It definitely takes a special kind of person to thrive in that environment. And that's why astronaut selection and training is so rigorous. They're not just looking for brilliant scientists and engineers. They're looking for people who are emotionally intelligent, culturally sensitive, adaptable, people who can handle stress and conflict effectively.
It's amazing, isn't it? We're talking about this incredible feat of engineering, this triumph of science and technology. But at its heart, it's really a story about the human spirit, about our ability to adapt and overcome challenges.
Absolutely. And it highlights the fact that space exploration is about so much more than just rockets and robots. It's about pushing the boundaries of what it means to be human.
Well said. But even with all the collaboration and teamwork that goes into space exploration, the article hints at some geopolitical tensions surrounding the ISS, especially in recent years.
Yeah, unfortunately, what happens on Earth doesn't always stay on Earth, even when you're orbiting hundreds of miles above it. Politics has a way of seeping into everything.
The article specifically mentioned the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine as a turning point. It really makes you question the whole beacon of peace narrative surrounding the ISS.
Right, because clearly international relations are complicated. And when you have a project like this with so many countries involved, it's bound to be affected by those complexities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder about the future of international collaboration in space.
Hmm.
Is it even possible to separate these incredible scientific endeavors from the political realities on Earth?
It's a tough question, and it's something that scientists, engineers, and policymakers are all grappling with. But let's shift gears for a moment and talk about the future of the ISS itself. Because from what I gathered from the article, it's not going to be up there forever, is it?
Yeah, everything has a lifespan, right? Even a technological marvel like the ISS. So what happens when it's time to retire this orbiting laboratory?
Well, it's not like you can just hit the brakes and park in the cosmic garage. Deorbiting something as massive and complex as the ISS is a monumental undertaking.
I can imagine. So how do you even begin to deorbit a space station?
Essentially, it involves slowing down the ISS's orbital speed just enough so that it begins to descend toward Earth.
Okay, but wouldn't that cause it to burn up on re-entry? I mean, we've all seen those incredible images of space capsules glowing red hot as they plunge through the atmosphere.
You're absolutely right. The vast majority of the ISS will indeed burn up during re-entry. That's just the nature of atmospheric drag and the immense heat generated.
So it just vaporizes?
Not entirely. While most of it will disintegrate, certain components are designed to withstand the heat of re-entry, particularly those containing hazardous materials like batteries and propellant tanks.
Oh, right. I didn't think about that. So they can't just let those components fall back to Earth willy-nilly.
Exactly. They need to ensure those pieces land in a remote-controlled area where they won't pose any risk to people or the environment. They've got it all carefully planned out.
So where did these surviving pieces end up?
They're targeted to splash down in a remote region of the Pacific Ocean, a place nicknamed the Spacecraft Cemetery.
A spacecraft cemetery. That's both eerie and fascinating. What's it like down there?
Well, it's this vast underwater graveyard of sorts, the final resting place for countless satellites, spent rocket stages, and other pieces of space debris that have fallen back to Earth.
Wow, a testament to just how much human activity has gone on in space. Even if we don't always see it, kind of makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. It makes you realize that even though space seems infinite, our footprint there is very real, and it raises questions about the future.
Exactly. As we venture further into space, how do we do so responsibly? How do we balance exploration with preservation?
Those are the big questions. And while the article doesn't offer any easy answers, it does highlight that we're entering a new era of space exploration, one where commercial interests are playing an increasingly significant role.
Right, the whole commercial space station concept, that seemed like a big part of the article. So are we talking about space hotels and moon bases anytime soon?
Maybe not moon bases just yet, but commercial space stations are definitely on the horizon. Companies like Axiom Space are already building modules for the ISS with the goal of eventually detaching them and creating their own independent station.
So the ISS could become like a stepping stone to a whole new era of commercial activity in space.
Exactly. And it's not just Axiom. Other companies are developing inflatable modules, even things like movie studios designed for filming in microgravity.
Wow, space tourism, space manufacturing, space entertainment. It sounds like science fiction is becoming science fact.
It really does. But of course, with any new frontier, there are challenges, and the article doesn't shy away from those either.
Like what? What are some of the challenges facing this new era of commercial space exploration?
Well, for one, there are the legal and ethical questions.
Like who owns space?
Yeah,
And who gets to decide what happens up there?
exactly. And who's responsible if something goes wrong? Who cleans up the mess? These are complex issues that need to be addressed.
Definitely. And then there's the environmental impact to consider.
Absolutely. Space debris is already a growing concern, and with more commercial activity in space, that problem is only going to get worse. We need to find ways to explore space sustainably without jeopardizing the safety of astronauts or creating more hazards in orbit.
It's a lot to think about.
It is. But it's also incredibly exciting. The International Space Station has shown us what's possible when we push the boundaries of human ingenuity and collaborate on a global scale. And as its lifespan draws to a close, it's paving the way for a new chapter in space exploration, one that promises to be even more ambitious and transformative.
And on that note, we'll leave you with this. If you had the opportunity, knowing all that we've discussed, would you journey to the ISS? Or perhaps even further, to a commercial space station or beyond? It's a question worth pondering. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of the International Space Station.
Ready for a deep dive into a topic that's got so many layers to it? We're tackling beauty today, and I mean really getting into it, the philosophy, the history. You sent over this Wikipedia article, and I gotta say, it is fascinating.
It really is. Where do we even begin with something as subjective as beauty? Everyone's got an opinion.
Right. Like, is it really in the eye of the beholder, or are there some things that are just universally beautiful? The article calls this whole debate the antinomy of taste.
Which is basically a fancy way of saying it's a philosophical tug of war that's been going on for centuries.
Exactly. Even the ancient Greeks were wrestling with this, and they even had a special word for beauty, kalos.
And kalos wasn't just about, like, looking good. It was tied to goodness, even morality. Imagine if people thought your character actually made you more beautiful.
Wow. So we're talking inner beauty way back then. That's a concept I wasn't expecting. Okay, so how did we get from that to those Renaissance paintings where everyone's got the same perfect features?
Well, the article talks about how beauty got really mathematical during the Renaissance. Think symmetry, the golden ratio, all that. It was like they were trying to create a formula for the ideal face.
It's amazing how much history is packed into a single word. And speaking of history, this Wikipedia entry goes deep on those ancient Greeks, even how their mythology tackles beauty.
Totally. Like Helen of Troy, right? Her beauty supposedly launched 1,000 ships. The article explains how for them, beauty, especially with people, was really connected to desire, eroticism even.
So it wasn't just about admiring someone from afar. But even before the classical period, you had folks like Pythagoras trying to define beauty.
Oh, absolutely. Pythagoras, being a math whiz, he saw beauty in those universal laws and ratios he was discovering. He even found those same principles in music, thought harmonic scales were inherently beautiful.
Which makes me think about how we experience beauty in nature. Do those mathematical principles still apply? Like, is there a reason we find certain landscapes so captivating?
That's what's so cool about this. It ties right back to that classical idea of beauty that gets revived during the Renaissance. Those classical sculptures, they weren't just going for realism, they were emphasizing those perfect proportions, echoing those ancient Greek ideals.
So, trying to replicate an ideal form, something that goes beyond just one person's appearance. So, those Renaissance artists, they were basically math geeks.
Maybe some of them. Huh. But it shows how seriously they took beauty, trying to define it, understand it. It's like they believe if you could just get those proportions exactly right, you could achieve true beauty.
Wow, talk about dedication. It reminds me of that quote, unity in variety and variety in unity. Isn't that supposed to describe beauty?
That's the one. There was Francis Hutcheson, a Scottish philosopher from the 1700s. The article mentions him as another voice in this whole debate about beauty. And his quote really gets at that push and pull between objective qualities like those mathematical ratios and our own subjective experiences.
So, back to square one then. Is beauty ultimately subjective, just in the eye of the beholder?
Not so fast. Hutcheson, he didn't think it was entirely subjective. He thought some things do have a quality that triggers a sense of beauty in us, even if we don't know why.
Okay, so maybe there's a middle ground. But then you've got someone like Immanuel Kant coming in with his own take. He was all about subjectivity when it came to beauty, wasn't he?
He was. Kant believed that there was no one standard of beauty, that it really deal deeply personal. But he adds this whole other layer with the concept of purposiveness.
Purposiveness. Okay, break that down for me. What did he mean by that?
He was saying that we're more likely to find something beautiful if we think it has a purpose, like it was designed with intention.
So something that looks random or chaotic, we're less likely to think it's beautiful.
Potentially, yeah. Like if you look at a building and can see a reason for its shape, even if you don't know what that reason is, you might be more likely to find it beautiful.
Interesting. It's like our brains are wired to look for order, for design, even in the natural world.
Exactly. And Kant takes it a step further, talking about free beauty versus adherent beauty.
Oh, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about these two types of beauty.
Free beauty is like appreciating something for what it is, not for what it's supposed to be, like a seashell or music without lyrics. We find them beautiful without needing to put any specific meaning onto them.
That makes sense. What about adherent beauty?
That's where it gets a little trickier. Adherent beauty, according to Kant, depends on us already having an idea of what the thing should be. So we might find a building beautiful because we understand architecture, or a human body because of societal standards.
So it's like adherent beauty comes with baggage. We're judging it based on all these pre-existing ideas.
Yeah, kind of. And that brings in a whole other can of worms, because those ideas can totally change over time, from culture to culture.
Which brings us right back to beauty is in the eye of the beholder. We've come full circle.
We have. It's like this endless loop of ideas. Our cultural background, what we've personally been through, even our understanding of things like math and design, it all gets mashed up into what we find beautiful. This Wikipedia article goes on, mentioning everything from the economic impacts of beauty to evolution.
Economic impacts. Hold on. What do they mean by that?
Well, apparently, studies have shown that statistically, attractive people actually earn more money, though those studies probably have their own biases. It's something to think about, though, isn't it? Makes you wonder if beauty really is just skin deep, or if there's more to it.
It definitely gives you a lot to think about. And speaking of different perspectives, this article really dives into how beauty has been viewed throughout history. Let's unpack that a bit more. What about the Middle Ages?
Oh, the Middle Ages had a completely different take on beauty. Religion was a huge influence.
Right, like those incredible Gothic cathedrals. They were designed to be beautiful, but in a way that was really tied to their faith. It wasn't just about aesthetics.
Absolutely. Thomas Aquinas, a major philosopher back then, he saw beauty as this reflection of God's perfection. The article says he even laid out 3 conditions for something to be beautiful: wholeness, harmony, and clarity.
Wow, so for him, beauty wasn't just about how something looked, it was way deeper than that.
Exactly. The article also talks about how the idea of light representing God really took off in the Middle Ages. Think about those stained glass windows in Gothic cathedrals, how they fill the space with all those colors.
Like they were trying to create a little piece of heaven here on earth. But even before the Middle Ages, the Romans had their own ideas about beauty, right? I mean, their architecture alone is stunning.
They did. Cicero, for example, he saw beauty in nature as evidence of a divine creator, proof of something bigger than us at work.
It's just amazing how different cultures throughout history have had their own unique way of appreciating and interpreting beauty.
It really is. It shows that beauty is this incredibly rich, nuanced concept that we keep coming back to again and again as humans.
It's true. Okay, so we've talked about ancient Greece, Rome, the Middle Ages. What about the Renaissance? They were obsessed with beauty, weren't they?
Oh, totally. The Renaissance was like a giant love letter to those classical ideals we talked about before, the ones from ancient Greece and Rome. Symmetry, proportion, harmony, they were all back in a big way.
It's like they were trying to recapture that ancient glory after what they saw as the Dark Ages, at least when it came to art and beauty.
Exactly. They looked back at those earlier civilizations with such admiration and tried to bring those ideas back.
And they weren't shy about criticizing what came before them either. I'm thinking about how some Renaissance artists and architects looked down on the Gothic style, thought it was crude and barbaric compared to the classics.
So true. They thought Gothic architecture had strayed too far from those classical ideals, that it was too busy, too unbalanced.
So they wanted to bring back a sense of order and logic to art and design. And they definitely left their mark on the world, that's for sure. But it's interesting to think about how those Renaissance ideas about beauty still influence us today, even subconsciously.
Totally. Our tastes have obviously evolved, but that focus on symmetry, proportion, harmony,
Mm.
it's still there. And everything from fashion to design, even how we see attractiveness.
It's like those Renaissance ideals got embedded in our culture, whether we realize it or not.
Exactly. And it shows just how powerful these ideas about beauty can be. They stick around, shaping how we see the world even centuries later.
That's incredible. But this Wikipedia article doesn't just stick to those positive aspects of beauty. It also gets into some of the more, shall we say, controversial aspects, especially how beauty standards impact society.
Right. And not always in a good way. It talks about how those standards can be really unfair and even damaging.
Yeah, like the pressure to conform to a certain ideal of beauty, which can be really hard, especially for women.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the article mentions studies that show how looks can actually affect things like your grades, your job prospects, even legal outcomes.
It's like we're hardwired to favor beauty, even when we know better. And don't even get me started on how messed up beauty standards get, thanks to marketing and advertising.
Oh, for sure. The media plays a huge role in how we see beauty, and often it's presenting something totally unrealistic and unattainable.
It's like they're selling us this perfect version of ourselves that we could never live up to. And it can be so hard to resist those messages, especially for young people who are still figuring themselves out.
Absolutely, especially with social media, where it seems like everyone is just showing their best selves, their highlight reel.
It's more important than ever to remember that true beauty comes in every shape, size, and form. But this Wikipedia article doesn't just focus on physical appearance. It also talks about inner beauty, right?
It does, and that's where things get a little more, deep. Inner beauty is about those qualities that make you beautiful on the inside. Kindness, compassion, intelligence, a sense of humor.
Those are definitely qualities I find attractive.
Me too. And I think most people would agree those inner qualities can make someone even more beautiful no matter what they look like on the outside.
It's like inner beauty shines through, makes someone even more captivating. But let's get back to those societal impacts of beauty we were talking about. This Wikipedia article mentions lookism, which is basically discrimination based on how you look.
It is. And it's a real prejudice that has serious consequences,
Mm-hmm.
just like racism or sexism. Lookism can hold people back and lead to unfair treatment.
It's like we're constantly judging each other based on how we look, sometimes without even realizing it. And those snap judgments really impact people's lives.
They do. It's important to be aware of those biases we all have, even the unconscious ones, so that we can try to do better and be more fair.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about the philosophy of beauty, the societal impacts, all these different cultural perspectives. But what about those people who say beauty is completely subjective, that you can't define it?
That's a fair point. As we've seen, there isn't a single definition that everyone agrees on. What I find beautiful, you might not, and vice versa. But I still think it's so valuable to explore all these different ideas about beauty, to try and understand what shapes our perceptions.
I agree. It's like trying to solve this fascinating puzzle, even though there might not be one right answer. And this Wikipedia article definitely gives us a lot of puzzle pieces to work with.
It does. Clearly, beauty is a concept that has captivated humans for centuries. It still fascinates and sparks debates, even today.
So true. Speaking of debates, the article mentions a couple of different philosophical stances on beauty objectivism and subjectivism. Should we dive into those a bit more?
What's objectivism, in a nutshell, is the idea that beauty is a real thing, that it exists in the object itself, whether anyone is looking at it or not. So a beautiful sunset is beautiful even if no one's there to see it.
So, like, beauty is an inherent property of the object itself.
Exactly. The objectivists say it's not about us, it's about the object.
Okay, I can see where they're coming from. But then you've got subjectivism, which is the total opposite, right?
You got it. Subjectivism says that beauty is totally in the eye of the beholder. What you find beautiful, someone else might find completely boring or even ugly.
Which, again, totally makes sense. We all have different tastes, different things we find appealing.
Exactly. And those preferences come from our upbringing, our culture, what we've personally experienced. It all gets thrown into the mix.
So where does that leave us? Is it a stalemate between the objectivists and the subjectivists?
Well, the article explains that a lot of philosophers find both extremes a bit lacking. They acknowledge there's this tension between this idea of a universal beauty and the fact that, in reality, people's tastes vary so much.
So is there a middle ground somewhere, a way to bridge those two ideas?
That's what some philosophers are trying to figure out.
Yeah.
One idea is that beauty might be what they call intersubjective.
Intersubjective. Okay, I'm not familiar with that term.
Basically, it means that beauty isn't totally objective or subjective, but it comes from shared values and experiences within a culture.
So it's like a group agreement on what's beautiful.
Sort of. Think about how some works of art or music are considered masterpieces across different generations and cultures. There's this shared understanding of their beauty, even though each person's individual response might be a little different.
That makes sense. It's like we're all tapping into this collective sense of aesthetics. But this whole debate about objectivity versus subjectivity reminds me of another thing this Wikipedia article brought up, the sense of taste.
Ah, yes. Taste, but not like what you taste with your tongue. Right. It's that ability we have to judge and appreciate beauty. And people have had a lot to say about it over the years.
Exactly. Some people just seem to have a natural eye for beauty, while others, maybe they need to develop their tastes over time.
Totally. And that's where this whole idea of experts comes in. Like in any field, you've got people who are considered connoisseurs of beauty, whose opinions carry a lot of weight.
So you're saying some people's taste is objectively better than others?
Yeah, that's a tough one. The idea is that these experts, through years of study and experience, have developed a more refined and subtle understanding of what makes something beautiful.
So they can appreciate things that the average person might miss.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that even experts disagree. At the end of the day, what we personally find beautiful matters a lot.
That makes sense. Like, I might not be an art historian, but I can still appreciate a beautiful painting. And the way I see that painting is just as valid as someone with a PhD in art history, right?
Right. There's room for both subjective appreciation and the expert analysis when it comes to beauty.
I like that. It's like there's no wrong way to experience beauty. It's a personal journey.
Exactly. And that journey can be so enriching, whether we're exploring different cultures, spending time in nature, or just taking a moment to appreciate the little beautiful things in our everyday lives.
Beautifully said. Speaking of appreciating beauty, this Wikipedia article spends a good amount of time on how beauty has been depicted in art throughout history.
It does. It's so cool to see how those depictions have evolved over time. It really reflects how our cultural values and ideals change, too.
Right. Like, think about how the female form has been portrayed, from those curvy Renaissance nudes to the more slender figures you see in 20th century art.
Exactly. Those changing portrayals tell us so much about what was considered the epitome of female beauty in different eras. What was considered the ideal in one century might be seen as totally outdated, even undesirable in another.
It's a good reminder that those beauty standards are always in flux, always changing. They're influenced by so many things, what's happening socially, culturally, even economically.
Totally. And it's good to keep those influences in mind to really think critically about those standards and not just accept them at face value.
Well said. Now, this article doesn't just stick to Western art either. It also touches on how beauty is seen in other cultures, like East Asia.
It does. And it's so interesting to see how those perspectives differ from the Western ideals we're used to. In traditional Chinese philosophy, beauty is often linked to balance, harmony, and nature.
So it's a more holistic view of beauty.
Exactly. It's not just about physical appearance, but about how everything fits together.
Yeah.
And you see this idea of balance everywhere in Chinese culture, from art and architecture to their gardens, even calligraphy.
It's like beauty is woven into the very fabric of their culture.
Precisely. It reminds us that there are so many ways of seeing and appreciating beauty, each one shaped by its own culture and philosophy.
Well said. We've covered so much ground, from philosophy to societal impacts to these cultural differences. But I want to go back to those studies about how physical attractiveness can actually affect things like job opportunities, even how you're treated in the legal system. Honestly, it's pretty disheartening.
It is disheartening, and it highlights why it's so important that we recognize these biases and try to do something about them. We
Hmm.
can't let how someone looks lead to unfair treatment or discrimination.
Exactly. We have to train ourselves to look beyond just appearances and see people for who they are, their character, their talents, all their unique qualities.
Exactly. And this is where the concept of inner beauty becomes even more important. All those qualities we talked about earlier, kindness, compassion, a good heart, those are the things that truly make someone beautiful, inside and out.
So well said. It's a good reminder that true beauty is so much more than just skin deep. It's about the whole package.
Totally. And as we've seen in this Wikipedia article, beauty is this complex, multifaceted concept with a long, fascinating history. People have been captivated and challenged by it for centuries. It's still a source of wonder and debate, even today.
I couldn't agree more. And speaking of awe-inspiring beauty, this article even touches on the concept of the sublime, which takes us to a whole other level of aesthetic experience.
Does. The sublime is beauty, but it's also more than beauty. It's about encountering something so vast, so powerful, that it evokes a sense of wonder, even a little bit of fear.
Joe, it's like beauty on steroids.
Huh, in a way, yeah. Think about standing at the edge of a massive canyon, staring up at a sky full of stars, or seeing a thunderstorm in all its power. Those experiences can be both terrifying and exhilarating.
I've definitely felt that sense of awe before. It's like you're face to face with something much bigger than yourself, something you can't fully grasp.
Exactly. And that feeling, it can be humbling, but also really uplifting at the same time. It reminds you of the incredible power and beauty of the natural world.
It really puts things in perspective, doesn't it? Makes you realize how small we are in the grand scheme of things. But it's also strangely comforting at the same time, like we're all connected to something much bigger than ourselves.
I agree. And that feeling of connection to something vast and mysterious, that's what the sublime is all about.
Beautifully put. Okay, so we've explored beauty from all angles here. Its philosophical side, its evolutionary roots, how it impacts society, how it varies across cultures, even those awe-inspiring manifestations like the sublime. But I'm curious, was there anything in this Wikipedia article that surprised you?
What surprised me most was how many different perspectives there are on this one single concept. From the ancient Greek philosophers to modern-day psychologists, it's incredible how many people have tried to understand what beauty really is. It shows just how fundamental this concept is to us as humans.
Totally. It's like this never-ending source of fascination, with each era and culture adding its own interpretation to the mix.
Exactly. And it makes you realize we still have so much to learn and discover about something that seems, at first glance, so simple, yet is actually incredibly complex.
Well said. So after this deep dive into the world of beauty, what stands out to you most?
What really strikes me is how much our perception of beauty is shaped by things we're not even aware of: cultural norms, societal pressures, even our own biology. It's fascinating and a bit humbling to realize how much we don't even realize is influencing our tastes and preferences.
I totally agree. It's like beauty isn't just something we see out there in the world. It's something we're actively creating in our own minds based on all these different factors.
Exactly. And that realization, I think, is a good starting point for developing a more critical and appreciative understanding of beauty in all its forms.
Beautifully said. And on that note, I think we need to shift gears just a bit.
I agree. We should dive into how beauty has been studied and showcased across different fields, like art.
Perfect. We really went deep on the philosophy and history of beauty in the last part, and now I'm ready to see how it's actually been expressed throughout history.
Me too. And this Wikipedia article does not disappoint. It takes us on a fascinating journey through how beauty shows up in art history.
And it's not just about, like, pretty paintings either. This article goes deep on the questions about what makes art beautiful, the different art movements, even the not-so-great parts of beauty standards.
Exactly. It reminds you that art doesn't just exist in a bubble, right? It always reflects what's going on in society at the time, the culture, the politics, everything.
It's like art gives us a glimpse into the past, lets us see the world through the eyes of the people who came before us. So, to kick off our art history crash course, let's start at the beginning with the ancient world.
Sounds good to me. The article gives a great overview of how those ancient cultures, like the Greeks and Romans, viewed and portrayed beauty.
Right. I'm thinking about those classical sculptures, the ones that emphasize perfect proportions and balance. They're still admired today, which says something. But those ideals, they didn't just come out of nowhere, did they?
Not at all. The article traces those influences back even further, mentioning how the ancient Greeks were themselves influenced by even earlier civilizations, like the Egyptians.
So it's like beauty standards have been passed down and reinvented throughout history, with each culture adding its own flavor to the mix.
Exactly. It shows how interconnected art and culture really are.
Totally. But we can't forget about the movements that challenge those old ideas about beauty, too. The article mentions Impressionism, with its focus on capturing those fleeting moments of light and color. And then there's Dadaism, which basically rejected all the traditional rules of art and beauty.
Those movements were total game changers. They really pushed the boundaries of what people considered beautiful and made everyone rethink their assumptions about art.
It's like they were saying, hey, you can find beauty in unexpected places and everyday things and the stuff we might normally overlook.
Exactly. And that's what makes art so awesome. It can challenge us, open our minds, and help us see the world in new ways.
Well said. But this Wikipedia article doesn't shy away from some of the more difficult aspects of beauty either. It talks about how art has been used to justify prejudice and discrimination throughout history, which is a bummer.
It is a bummer. And it reminds us that beauty standards, even in art, can be really powerful and even harmful when they're used to create these hierarchies and exclude certain groups of people.
Right. Think about how Eurocentric beauty standards are often presented as the ideal. That can be so damaging for people of color who don't fit those narrow definitions.
Absolutely. Those Eurocentric standards can be so pervasive. They pop up everywhere, from magazines and commercials to movies and TV. And art is definitely not immune to it.
It's like there's this constant message that beauty equals white, which is incredibly harmful and completely untrue.
Exactly. We need to challenge those narrow definitions of beauty and celebrate diversity in all its forms.
Absolutely. True beauty comes in all shapes, sizes, and colors. And art can be such a powerful tool for sharing that message of inclusivity and diversity.
For sure. By showing the beauty of people from all walks of life, art can help us challenge stereotypes, break down barriers, and create a more just and equal world.
Well said. But this article doesn't just talk about how beauty is portrayed. It also gets into the actual techniques and styles artists use, like those mathematical principles we were talking about before.
It does. And it's so interesting to see how those principles have been applied across different cultures and time periods. From the symmetry and balance in classical architecture to those intricate patterns you see in Islamic art. It's fascinating.
It's like there's this universal language of beauty that goes beyond culture, using shapes, colors, and proportions to create something that's just naturally pleasing to the eye.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And understanding those principles can make us appreciate art from all over the world even more.
Totally. But this article doesn't limit itself to those traditional art forms like painting and sculpture. It also looks at photography, film, even digital art.
It does. And it's really exciting to see how those newer art forms are pushing boundaries and finding new ways to express beauty.
It's like art is this ongoing conversation, and each generation adds its own unique voice and perspective.
Exactly. That's what keeps it so interesting and inspiring.
Well said. But let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the economic side of beauty, which the article also touches on. It's not something we always think about.
It's true. It's interesting to consider how beauty plays a role in everything from marketing and advertising to getting a job and even income inequality.
Right, like studies show that attractive people are often seen as more trustworthy, competent, even intelligent, which can really give them an advantage.
Exactly. And because of that, they're more likely to get hired, to get promoted, and even to earn higher salaries.
It's like being attractive comes with built-in privilege, which isn't fair, but it's the reality.
It is, sadly. And this beauty premium, as they call it, can really contribute to social and economic inequality.
It's true, and it just highlights how important it is to recognize these biases and to work towards creating a more equal society where everyone has the same opportunities, no matter what they look like.
Couldn't agree more. It reminds us that beauty isn't just this superficial thing. It can have a very real impact on our lives.
Well said. But let's go back to something we talked about earlier, the idea of beauty being a source of pleasure. The article mentions that some philosophers, like hedonists, believe that beauty and pleasure are basically inseparable.
They do. It's an interesting way to look at it. Hedonism, at its core, is all about seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. And when you apply that to beauty, it makes sense. The experience of beauty are inherently pleasurable.
So when we see something beautiful, it just makes us feel good.
Exactly. And those good feelings are a big part of why we're so drawn to beauty, whether it's a stunning sunset or a great piece of music or even a well-designed object.
Makes sense to me. We're naturally drawn to things that make us feel good. But not every experience of beauty is purely happy and light, right? Sometimes beauty can be kind of bittersweet, maybe even a little painful.
That's a really good point. And it shows how complex both beauty and pleasure really are. Think about a tragic love story, for example. It can be beautifully written with amazing characters and a plot that just sucks you in, but it can also make you feel sad, make you think about loss and heartbreak.
Or even a piece of music that's both beautiful and haunting. It can stir up all sorts of emotions, not all of them purely positive.
Exactly. And those more complicated aesthetic experiences challenge that idea that beauty and pleasure are always the same thing.
It's like beauty can be a source of both joy and sorrow, depending on what it is and what we're bringing to it, you know?
Totally. And those bittersweet experiences can be just as powerful and meaningful as the ones that are purely pleasurable.
Well said. But let's not get too lost in philosophy. The article also touches on some really interesting scientific perspectives on beauty, like neuroaesthetics.
Right. Neuroaesthetics is a pretty new field that looks at what's happening in our brains when we experience beauty.
So, like trying to figure out the science behind our appreciation of beauty.
Exactly. And it's still early days, but researchers are already making some fascinating discoveries. For instance, studies using brain imaging have shown that certain parts of the brain, like the medial orbitofrontal cortex, become more active when people are looking at something they think is beautiful.
So there's literally a part of our brain that lights up when we see something beautiful.
It seems that way. And those findings suggest that there might be some universal neural mechanisms at play here. It might not just be subjective or cultural. There might be something hardwired into us.
That's amazing. So you're saying that beauty really is more than skin deep. It's literally in our brains.
It's a real possibility.
Yeah.
And it brings up all these questions about the nature of beauty and its role in our evolution as humans.
It really does. Okay, so we've talked about everything from the philosophy of beauty to the actual science of it. But I want to go back to something you said earlier, that beauty can be found in the most unexpected places.
Absolutely. And that's one of the most wonderful things about beauty.
Yeah.
It's not confined to fancy art galleries or concert halls. It's everywhere. You just have to be open to seeing it.
Right, like the way the light filters through the trees on a perfect autumn day, or the sound of children laughing, or even the smell of freshly baked bread.
Exactly. Beauty is all around us if we just take the time to pay attention. It reminds us to slow down, appreciate the present moment, and find joy in the simple things.
Beautifully said. Speaking of finding beauty in everyday things, this Wikipedia article also mentions something called everyday aesthetics, which is a new area of study in philosophy, apparently.
It is. Everyday aesthetics looks at the beauty in our daily lives, from the clothes we wear and the food we eat, to the spaces where we spend our time.
So it's about appreciating the beauty in ordinary things, the stuff we usually don't even think about.
Exactly. It's recognizing that aesthetics isn't just about high art or these grand, important-sounding things. It's part of our everyday lives, whether we realize it or not.
I love that. It's like a reminder to find joy and meaning in the ordinary, to appreciate the beauty around us, even in the smallest things.
Precisely. And I think that's a wonderful way to go through life with a sense of curiosity and appreciation for all the beauty the world has to offer.
Well said. And speaking of the beauty of the world, this Wikipedia article mentions how beauty has been used to inspire and motivate people throughout history.
It has. Think about it. From religious art that evokes a sense of awe and reverence to political posters that rally people to a cause, beauty has this power to move us, to inspire us, and even to change the world.
Right, like how music has been used to unite people across cultures and give a voice to social and political movements.
Exactly. Or how art has been used to challenge injustice, start important conversations, and inspire social change.
It's like beauty can be a force for good in the world.
It absolutely can.
Yeah.
It reminds us that beauty is much more than just a superficial thing. It has the power to create real positive change.
Well said. But let's not forget about the importance of expressing ourselves. This Wikipedia article also mentions personal aesthetics, which is all about finding your own unique style and taste.
It is, and I think it's so important to explore that, to figure out what speaks to you, what moves you, what brings you joy.
Right. It's about creating a life that's both beautiful and meaningful to you, regardless of what anyone else thinks.
Exactly. That's one of the most rewarding things about beauty. It's a journey of self-discovery, a way to connect with your own creativity and express yourself.
Beautifully put. Speaking of personal expression, this article doesn't just talk about beauty as something we observe passively. It also talks about creating beauty, about actively shaping our world to reflect our own aesthetic values.
It does. And that act of creation, whether it's through art or music or design, or even just arranging our homes in a way that we find beautiful, can be so fulfilling.
It's like we're all artists in our own way, shaping and reshaping our little corner of the world to reflect our own unique vision of beauty.
Exactly. It's such a powerful form of self-expression, a way to connect with ourselves and share our unique vision with the world.
Well said. But let's not forget about the community aspect either. This Wikipedia article talks about the social aspects of beauty, how it can bring people together and make those bonds stronger.
It does. And it's true. Beauty can be this amazing unifying force.
Hmm,
Think about how a piece of music, a work of art, or even a shared experience in nature can move people from all walks of life.
right. Those shared experiences build connections, a sense of belonging, reminding us that we're all connected to something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. And those experiences can be so powerful, promoting empathy, understanding, even love.
It's like beauty has this amazing ability to cut through our differences and bring us together.
It really does. And I think that's something to celebrate, especially in a world that often feels so divided.
Well said. But let's come back to something we discussed earlier. The fact that those beauty standards are always changing.
Always. It's wild to think about how our idea of beauty might continue to change in the future. New technologies, different cultural values, even our understanding of the human brain, it can all change how we see beauty.
Right, like virtual reality could create whole new forms of aesthetic experience. And artificial intelligence, who knows how that will challenge our ideas about creativity and beauty.
It's true. The future of beauty is wide open, full of exciting possibilities and challenges.
It's a really exciting time to be alive, that's for sure. But with all this talk about the future of beauty, what do you think is the most important thing for people to remember about it?
That's a great question. I think the most important thing is to remember that beauty isn't about finding the right answer. It's a journey. It's about staying open to new experiences, challenging what you think you know, and finding joy and wonder in the world around you.
Beautifully said. And this Wikipedia article has given us so much to think about already.
It really has. We talked about beauty being connected to pleasure, but what about its connection to being useful?
That's an interesting thought, and the article does bring that up. It mentions how some philosophers believe that beauty can be tied to an object's functionality.
Exactly. Think about it. A well-designed tool can be beautiful in its simplicity and efficiency.
Right, it's like form follows function, but that form can be beautiful on its own too. But then you have things like sunsets or snowflakes. They're not useful in the same way, but they're undeniably beautiful.
You've hit on a key point there. That's where the debate really gets going. Is something's beauty better because it's useful, or can something be beautiful just for being beautiful, even if it has no practical use?
It's a great question, and I don't think there's an easy answer. It speaks to the subjective nature of beauty, too. What one person finds useful and beautiful, another might find purely decorative or even pointless.
Exactly. It all comes back to those individual perspectives and those cultural influences we were talking about before. There's no one right answer, which is what I love about this topic. It's endlessly fascinating.
It's amazing how much ground we've covered in just a few deep dives, wouldn't you say? From ancient philosophers to modern-day neuroscience, we've gone on quite a journey.
We really have.
Yeah?
Just goes to show how many layers there are to this idea of beauty, and we've only just scratched the surface.
True, but what a surface it's been. We've explored how beauty can be both in the eye of the beholder and something that exists independently, We've seen how our biology, our culture, our personal experiences, they all play a part. We've seen how beauty is portrayed in art, debated by philosophers, and even studied by scientists.
And don't forget about the impact it has on us, how it shapes everything from our social interactions to our chances in life, even how we see ourselves. Beauty is a powerful force, no doubt about it.
Incredibly powerful. But after all this, I think what sticks with me most is that this isn't about finding some right answer to the question of beauty. It's more about being open to all the possibilities, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's about approaching the world with a sense of wonder, appreciating the beauty in everything, whether it's something we encounter every day or something rare and extraordinary. It's about celebrating the beauty we find in ourselves and each other, both inside and out.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we want to leave you, our listeners, with one final thought to ponder. As you go about your day, we challenge you to consider this. Can something be beautiful just for the sake of being beautiful, valuable simply because it's aesthetically pleasing? Or does true beauty always need to have some deeper meaning or purpose?
It's something to think about as you continue your own exploration of this endlessly fascinating topic.
We hope this deep dive has piqued your curiosity and inspired you to see the world with fresh eyes, appreciating all the beauty that surrounds us. Until next time.